Here at Disturbed, we know shaking in your boots can work up quite the appetite. That's why we're so excited to introduce today's sponsor, HelloFresh. What's the difference between HelloFresh and that boxed ramen you were about to make? About the same difference as your 7-year-old nephew's scariest story and the horrors you hear on Disturbed. A much higher quality experience at about the same cost. Make this fall the tastiest season yet with farm-fresh produce and easy autumn-inspired recipes delivered right to your door with HelloFresh. Have a creepy encounter with a crazed killer in the produce aisle? HelloFresh helps you skip trips to the grocery store altogether, saving you time you could spend searching for Sasquatch or confirming that aliens exist. I highly recommend the turkey ragu spaghetti, 20 minutes of cooking that fed my whole family. Sign up for America's #1 meal kit. Get 10 free meals at hellofresh.com/freedisturbed. Applied across 7 boxes, new subscribers only vary by plan. That's 10 free HelloFresh meals just by going to hellofresh.com/freedisturbed. Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. We're all fighting our own demons. Mine happened to slam cabinets and break glasses. But that's not the case for everyone. Some people are haunted in ways we can't see. Sometimes you need a little help to fight the forces from beyond. You're not crazy. You just might need therapy. There have been times in my life when I made mistakes. I have skeletons in my closet, and they're not all former hosts of Disturbed. When I don't think I can do it on my own, therapy can help me see the best path forward and make sense of all the mystery. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's 100% online and is designed to fit your schedule and your needs on your time. Overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/DTHS today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/DTHS.
This content may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion advised.
Welcome to this first episode of our all-new Patreon exclusive show, Out of Sight, Out of Their Mind. In this new format, we'll recount the eerie details of serial killers who ventured off the beaten path to make their mark. They're not on the evening news. They're not getting their own Netflix series. They lurk just beyond your gaze in the shadows of cities and towns all over the world. Here, we shine a light on their heinous crimes, wade knee-deep into their madness, and focus our collective consciousness on the foul monsters we've ignored for too long. This is Out of Sight, Out of Their Mind. If you enjoy this episode, head over to the Patreon to check out future releases, ad-free episodes, and more bonus content. Link in the description. Without further ado, Robert Hansen, the Butcher Baker. Alaska, a breathtaking wilderness with frozen landscapes that seem to stretch on forever. It's a land where the cold can pierce your bones, where the howling wind can deafen even the loudest roars and the softest cries. It's a place with few eyes and ears to witness whatever dark intentions you may plan in its desolate interior. Secrets buried deep in the snow, lost in the endless woods, and hidden from society. This is the place Robert Hansen chose to hunt his prey. Between 1972 and 1983, Hansen abducted, raped, and murdered at least 17 women on the Alaskan tundra. How do you become so twisted, so evil, that you would even think of doing something like that? How do you become the Butcher Baker? Well, Robert was born in the lower states, Iowa, in 1939. His father was cold and unforgiving. Much like the frontier he would someday make his killing grounds. Young Robert was shy, and he suffered from a stutter that made him a target of bullies. His acne-scarred face didn't do him any favors either. And in the judgmental and repressive culture he found around himself, he became withdrawn and quiet. His early life was a cocktail of rejection and humiliation. His family owned a bakery, and from an early age it was Robert's begrudging position to join the effort whether he liked it or not. He would toil in the kitchen, baking for hours for scarce pay before heading to school. As childhood turned to adolescence, the complete lack of self-determination in Robert's life made him resentful, and a quiet rage would become a constant companion. His lone solace became hunting, where as a 12-year-old he was able to get away from everything. His jeering classmates, the overbearing parents. He could find his own path through the woods. He learned to track small game and before long became a crack shot with a bow. For the first time in his life, he had earned some power, some control, however minimal. It was a feeling Robert would come to crave, and though his method of self-actualization never changed, his targets did. Over time, Robert's quiet rage became louder and louder, and his indignancy could only last so long. While his classmates went on dates and played sports, Robert's awkward disposition, volatile nature, and pockmarked complexion made him more and more outcast from his peers. The first sign of Robert's violent future came on December 7th, 1960. Hansen was arrested for burning down a school bus garage, a self-justified method of revenge on the school that had tortured him. At the time, a shrink judged him to have an infantile personality, marked by childlike hysteria, volatile emotions, and clingy fixations on others. Modern diagnoses include manic depression and schizophrenic episodes. He served 20 months of his 3-year sentence before being released from the Anamosa State Penitentiary. After years of further delinquency, including several stints in jail for petty theft, Robert found himself in his second marriage with 2 kids in tow. They decided to move to Alaska to find a new life, and in 1967, the Hansens relocated to Anchorage. Robert opened a bakery, making use of all of those hours toiling over ovens in his youth. He and his wife Darla became popular amongst locals, their establishment quickly becoming a welcome part of the social fabric of their new neighborhood. By all accounts, Robert had finally found himself. A house, a successful business, a wife and kids, a community. The American dream was finally his to hold. He even found time to pursue an old pastime of his. He set multiple local hunting records upon moving to Alaska. But below the surface of Robert's mind, that rage still boiled inside him. He still searched for prey, still craved the power he felt for the hunt. Only now, instead of the woods in Iowa, he was prowling the dark streets of Anchorage, hoping to find a more human perspective. It started in 1971. local officials began to notice a string of sex workers' disappearances gone unsolved. The nature of the job, they first thought. The transient nature of a city's underbelly. But as the names started piling up, the evidence became too obvious to ignore. Someone was abducting these women. The police didn't know then, but they were already years behind a serial killer loose in their streets. It was also the same year that Robert's evil would surface in earnest. He was arrested for attempting to abduct an 18-year-old woman named Susan Hepburn and pled no contest to assault with a deadly weapon. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and his wife dragged their kids to visit him week after week. Though Darla was humiliated by his actions, she thought she could save him in her hubris. After only 6 months, Hansen was placed in a halfway house on work release and was back on the streets of Anchorage. Robert had perfected a horrifying routine. He would find a sex worker and solicit her for her services. He would appear kind and friendly, joking with them to get their guard down. Then, once inside his car, everything would change. Robert would handcuff them and abduct them before dragging them into his basement, where he would force himself onto these helpless women. When he was finished, he would proceed to take them deep into the Alaskan wilderness, either by car or by bush plane. There, far from the safety of the city, Hansen would release them like wild animals. Except they weren't animals. They were human beings, terrified, helpless, and running for their lives. And he was the hunter, armed with a rifle and bow, tracking them through the dense woods. It was the ultimate form of control, stalking his prey, watching them panic, stumble, and fall over themselves. After all those years of women ignoring him, belittling him for his stutter and his scarred face, he had their full attention now, and his face wasn't one they would soon forget. In their final moments, he would let the rage consume him, demanding the respect he thought he had been denied, that he believed he deserved. After some time, he'd finally train his weapon on them before pulling the trigger. Over the course of more than a decade, Hansen is believed to have killed at least 17 women. Beneath the thick Alaskan snow, he'd bury their bodies in shallow graves, scattering them across the wilderness, forgotten remnants of his twisted games. Hansen was meticulous and patient. He'd sometimes wait years between victims, even soliciting sex workers normally to build their trust. He became confident, and that confidence would be what finally led police to his identification. In 1983, Robert offered 17-year-old Cindy Paulson $200 to perform oral sex on him in his car. Once she agreed and entered the vehicle, Hansen drove her to his home, where he proceeded to chain her by the neck to a pillar in his basement, raping and torturing her for hours before he fell asleep on a nearby couch. After waking, he told Cindy he would take her out to his cabin in the bush, only accessible by boat or plane. Paulson crouched in the back seat of his car, her wrists cuffed in front of her, earned a stroke of luck when Robert forgot to lock the doors as he went to pack his plane for their departure. Barefoot, handcuffed, and in minimal clothing, she broke out of his vehicle and bolted to a nearby highway. Robert gave chase, but saw that he was too late. Cindy had already flagged down a truck driver who was alarmed at her disheveled appearance and pulled over to help her. The driver took her to a local inn where she called police. Investigators met with her to discuss her harrowing experience. The torture chamber in Hansen's basement sent shivers down investigators' spines. However, efforts to arrest Robert were initially thwarted. Hansen convinced a friend to offer an alibi for him and to take his rifles and ammo for the time being. He said that Paulson had attempted to extort him and left her blue shoes in his car when she ran off in a fit of rage. Hansen's deeds were quickly catching up with him, though. Alaskan state troopers had identified multiple bodies in the wilderness surrounding Anchorage, including the Matanuska-Susitna Valley, where Robert told Cindy his cabin was. For 2 years up to this point, they had been collecting and identifying the bodies of young women murdered and buried out in the tundra. Detective Glenn Floth was convinced that these women were all murdered by the same person. Floth contacted the FBI and received help from famed special agent John Douglas, who helped detectives craft an offender profile based on the conditions of the missing women they had recovered. They concluded that the assailant would likely be an experienced hunter who had low self-esteem, who may have a history of being rejected by women and would feel compelled to keep souvenirs of his murders, such as a victim's jewelry. Douglas even suggested that the murderer may have a stutter. When the detectives came across Paulson's testimony, their jaw dropped. It matched their offender profile line by line. He even had a plane and a remote property in the valley at the source of their investigation. Alongside the FBI's support, Anchorage PD and Floth finally obtained a warrant to search Robert's home and plane. On October 27, 1983, investigators raided his house and were astonished at what they found. In addition to the torture chamber described by Cindy Paulson, they uncovered jewelry belonging to some of the missing women, as well as an array of firearms in a corner hideaway of Hansen's attic. The firearms that he had kept with his friend that would have linked him to the other woman's murders. Also found was an aeronautical chart with 37 little X marks on it, hidden behind Hansen's headboard. Many of these marks matched sites where bodies had been found, and others would soon reveal more bodies at the locations they marked. The evidence was undeniable. Robert Hansen tried as best as he could to deny everything, but eventually cracked under the pressure. He blamed his victims. He justified everything and displayed no remorse while doing so. He admitted to the murders that the investigation had already identified, but no more. Robert Hansen was arrested, and in 1984 he was convicted of the abduction, rape, and murder of at least 4 women, though authorities suspect the number of his victims is much higher. He was sentenced to 461 years in prison without the possibility of parole. For decades, Hansen rotted in his cell. The irony of a proud hunter now trapped in a lone cage was a fitting end to his miserable life. In 2014, at the age of 75, he died in prison, taking with him the true number of his victims and the full extent of his depravity. Robert Hansen, the butcher baker, left a permanent scar on the land he called home. His legend still haunts the frozen landscape that he desecrated with his killings. The bones of many of his victims still lie beneath the Alaskan snow, waiting to be uncovered, their justice still unfulfilled. He made the lives of these people a mere game, warping the beautiful wilderness into his hunting grounds. No matter how deeply he buried his sins in the frozen, desolate earth, the truth has a way of clawing its way back to the surface. May the bodies of his victims someday be discovered, their spirits granted the peace they deserve. and with any grace, may the full extent of his crimes be unearthed and laid bare under the unforgiving light of a new day. This has been Out of Sight, Out of Their Mind, a production of the Disturbed True Horror team at Killer Podcasts. Special thanks to our producer, Elizabeth Flood, our videographer, Kay Holmberg, and our audio engineer and sound designer, Nathan Corson. Executive producer, Noah Fouts. I've been your host, Doug Bailey. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay safe out there.
An airliner heads for Alaska with 101 passengers and crew. Then, somewhere over the Gulf of Alaska, Flight 293 slams into the icy waters below.
Even if all four engines quit, it just doesn't fall out of the sky.
No bodies were recovered. Loved ones had no closure and were left to wonder.
What happened to Flight 293?
Unsolved Histories, What Happened to Flight 293 is available now, wherever you get your podcasts.